Hello, everyone, and welcome to Schmidtless Live. I am your host, Kurt Schmidt, president and partner at Foundry, and I am truly happy today because I've got, one of those people you meet where you could just basically spend like an entire weekend just conversing, just talking to them and having a long conversation. Well, Sarita's that person to me. She's someone that I've always learned a lot from. We've known each other for a while. I'm so excited that she's here today. Before I jump in, though, I do have to do my little plug and mention that we are hiring at Foundry, and we're always hiring. Go and check out the careers page. If you don't see a job that exactly matches what you're good at, shoot us a note. Let's talk. We're always open to chatting with folks, so we'd love to hear from you. To get into today's conversation, we're going to talk about something that both Sarita and I are very passionate about, which is employee engagement, creating passion around the work that you do, but also creating a safe and inclusive environment. So I want to jump right in to talk to Sarita. Sarita, how are you today? It is so good to see you.
Hi, Kurt. It's so great to see you. The sun is shining here in Minnesota,
yeah.
and I get to chat with you, so it's a pretty good day.
It's a pretty good day. So tell me about the work you do, Sarita. You recently just started a new job, but you also have your own company as well. Tell me about what you do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this topic is just something that's like deeply ingrained in who I am. This idea of like, how do we kind of collectively, incrementally move towards like a more fair, a more like joyful, a more sort of humanity-based kind of culture.
Yeah.
So I've been working on a startup called Jomanity for the last year and a half, and it's a different take on social. We call it Humanity Central Social. We also say, I don't know if we're allowed to curse, but we also say it's social that doesn't make you feel like shit. That's
if it's you, it's totally fine.
Okay, good. Because I did it. And then also I'm super excited. I just started a role with a startup called Structural. And the mission for Structural is around really changing the face of like what opportunity looks like. And this is maybe the heart of what you and I are talking about today, is that people who look like you, which is, delightful, but like, that sort of tends to be the higher up you go in an organization, that sort of tends to be what it looks like. And so how do you sort of diversify what it even means to have opportunity? And, like, for example, in Minnesota, there's so much around like the golf course or the cabins or like, all of those sorts of things. And so that's such a sliver of a person's experience, such a sliver. It's not even necessarily a representation of who a person is.
Yep.
So Structural is focused on this idea of like, how do you connect more people to meaningful opportunity in ways that haven't always been sort of the traditional ways. So I'm super excited about it.
That's great. I'm excited for you. It's a good way to kick off in the new year, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think so.
Well, I did a speaking engagement not long ago. Well, I guess in the before times. I did a speaking engagement where I had talked about, Gardner started their like employee engagement stuff back in 2000, where they were saying they found that 70%, 75% of people feel disengaged at work. They don't feel engaged at work. And I thought to myself, like, what if that number was flipped? Like, what a different world we would live in if 75 of people were really engaged in the work that they did and in the works they did. Now, again, as both you and I know, it's kind of a two-way street, right? You got to have the right organization, but you also have to be the right fit at the right time in the right place for yourself personally, but stayed pretty consistent. But we've had to work really hard at it. Like, we've had to be very intentional with it. And now that we see things that are going to be opening up soon, Sarita, I mean, what are you thinking? What things can we take away from this pandemic experience in ways that we can either ourselves personally empower ourselves to be more engaged at work, or as an organization, what can we be learning from this past pandemic? What are some of the opportunities it's created?
As you said, you and I could spend the whole weekend chatting about this topic. I think maybe there's a few things. I think, if you think like, say, for example, if you think about Maslow's hierarchy and you think about like, there's been so much time around like, executive presence and like, what, do you own the room and all of those sorts of things were like the norms and the, kind of like the goals before. And then now we've like, with the pandemic and like not having these sort of fundamentals, like we are biologically wired to be around other people.
Yep.
We like it is like hands down the single biggest source of like well-being for people and healthy, meaningful relationships. And so like you take that away or you sort of degrade that and people have this sense of isolation and then all of the things that come with that. And so it's what's been interesting and something that I think hopefully is long-term value just for society is this idea that like we don't take the basics for granted. Like, you know, like there's so much like, oh, that person popped their collar or, you know, whatever, the shoes or, you know, all of these things that are so like we've all known intellectually they're superficial, but they mean something.
Sure.
And it's kind of interesting that we've gone back to this place where it's like you see people and like, you know, you've seen a lot of tears undoubtedly, right? Like you've seen people's babies running around in diapers, you know, everybody's dog. Like if someone has a dog, you know, their dogs, right? Yep. And like there's this whole thing where it's like, it feels very humanizing because like we all have these like fundamental, like that low end of Maslow's, like we all like who hasn't been terrified, who hasn't felt overwhelmed, who hasn't been so fearful for the future. And so you have these like sort of fundamental safety things. But I do think there's this long-term piece, which I hope that we keep, which is that we're just all human. Like, let's just remember not so much title, you know, not so much like, you know, what does your LinkedIn profile say or whatever, but just like at the end of the day, you know, like what is it to be human? It's like you want to connect with people. You want to have this sense of like fulfillment and sense of like life satisfaction. You know, you want to feel like you have meaning and purpose. Like all of those basics are like front and center. So I hope that sticks with us. Uh-oh.
Nope. Whoops. Slipped it. I hit the wrong button.
Okay.
Yeah. No, I get that, Sarita, because the exciting thing for me has been getting to know people at that much more personal level, even though we only see each other from here to here or whatever. There is so much more that we pick up on around what's going on and how people are living their lives. And I think that's a really powerful thing if we can take that with us, because I think where we've been, you know, kind of exploring is, all right, how do we go back to work, right? Like what does work from home look like versus being in the office? My company, for example, has always had a very strong office culture. It's been very, you know, lots of inside jokes, you know, lots of, you know, we have a pool table, you know, there's a lot of commiserating, if you will, that goes on in the office. And I think we've been able to do it virtually pretty well. But what happens when we start to split those things now? You know, I feel like in part of me is that, you know, you've got to create space for both kinds of people that get the most out of those different experiences, is having the office, making sure it's a safe and fun place to be, but also making the people who maybe decide to work from home more often don't feel like they're part of a different group, which I think is the scariest thing for me going back, is that these groups start to separate a bit, right? And you've had the benefit to work with people offshore. You know what it's like when you've got a team that's separate but together. You know, I mean, what are some ways that you found in your career, like of crossing that boundary between you know, that remote and understanding who that person is, yet the person who's next to you, you're, you know, sharing, you know, LaCroix with in the office.
Yeah. No, I know what you mean. Yeah. Cause you definitely have a very personable and like very like interpersonally focused culture.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think one of the things, I think you're right. I think working with people offshore, like over many, many years, especially when there's cultural norms that are very different. Like, like we as Americans are really, really comfortable. I think increasingly more comfortable talking about like our personal lives. And did I lose you again? I may have
Nope, I'm here. I'm just focusing on you.
Oh, okay. So, I mean, definitely one of my favorite tactics ever was something that I learned in a leadership course, like or leadership sort of immersion a while ago, was just like do a check-in at the beginning, just like how are you showing up? Because inevitably, like it's so fascinating to hear when you ask people just like, how are you showing up? What's going on in life outside of work? Everybody's got something going on. Like even pre-COVID, like people just had stuff. And so I think like it just means that, you know, when you recognize like there's this whole person who has like this tiny sliver that you see even in person, but like you just see like this professional persona, and this is one face. And so you hear all this other stuff, like my kid's leaving for college, my mom or dad is sick. Like you hear all of these things, and how can you not have just naturally, like it just sort of biologically triggers compassion. And then it makes it so much better. It just makes it so much more interesting and patient and fulfilling and productive.
Yeah, and I want to ask you, Sarita, because sometimes I have people coming to me and saying, well, I'm interested in creating that sort of environment, but my company isn't necessarily, not necessarily willing, but maybe they're not geared up for it, or they're, where does this need to start? Does it need to start in HR department to start making policies and procedures? Can it just be me with my team? But then do I risk being sort of this lone gun that's doing things differently than my peers? Like, what's your suggestion to somebody who's maybe stuck in a situation like that?
I feel like every scenario you said sounds like a pretty reasonable scenario. I mean, I think if HR came up with policies and procedures, people would laugh and mock them. So maybe not that one, but the other ones, like that's a huge question. I've wondered that question many times. If you have a culture where it's sort of this like stoic, this is the way it's always been kind of culture, and you're trying to like create this sort of grassroots kind of change, like it's a huge range of how that, like you might have your immediate circle may be really resonant, like that may be really resonant, and work with them. And then like as it gets out, it might be like, oh, you're a hippie, or I've actually been called a tree hugger many, many times, which is true. I am a tree hugger, but I feel like is that a bad thing?
Trees need hugs.
Trees need hugs, right? And like we get something when we give someone a hug. So I think it's all of those things. I do think that's a big question, is like how far can you push against the status quo in an organization before you hit like a limit where it's like the organization's not going to budge. And I think you and I have talked about this. Like one of my favorite lines is from Adam Grant, where he said, like, take a hard look at an organization before you join, because it's way more likely that culture is going to change you. You're not going to change that culture.
No, I've talked about it on the show. There's the fog of hiring, right? You're going through the interview process. Sure, you're looking up their webpage a little bit. Maybe even you go to Glassdoor and take a quick look there, but it's like Amazon reviews. What can you really trust? There's that fog that happens with folks when they're going through that hiring process, all the possibilities, right? All the things that could happen. And so I tend to think, we might not be as critical in that moment.
You're right. Yeah. I think the best metaphor I've heard is that it's like when you're recruiting, it's like dating. And you're like, oh, it's so romantic and flowers and music or whatever.
They love me. They want me. They really want me.
Yeah. And then you start a job, and then it's marriage. And it's like, why are there socks under every cushion? Like what? Like, all of this normal things.
Yeah. I love a good metaphor, Sarita.
So I think it's true. I mean, that's the piece of like, probably the more senior you get, probably the more opportunities you have to like know people who know people on the inside, and you can try and get a sense of like what it's like.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it is a little bit of a leap of faith. And so I think that's why reputation is so critical. I know, like, I think probably we're both in places where we're really cognizant of our reputation, our organizational reputation, because like attracts like, you sort of try, you put out what it is you want to bring in.
Yep. Yeah. And that's why, that's honestly been the advice that I've given these people, is that you can't change who you are, because you've got to think about your career, not just the job that's in front of you. Where are you trying to go as an individual? And what I've seen too often, and I've done a lot of career coaching over the past year with people who've been laid off, who have been at a job for 15 years, 20 years in some cases, and they have no outside network. They just have their job. And the day you leave that job, nobody remembers you there anymore. It doesn't matter if you were there 15 years, 20 years, 100 years, it doesn't matter. Like the day you're gone, you're gone. You're out of that network. And that can be really, really concerning for folks, because they probably didn't expect that to happen, because they were just mixing it up with everybody just the day before, and then the layoffs came, and now why is nobody returning my emails? You know, and then they're struggling because now they have to go and build out a network. And so again, that's the advice I've given these people, is that, yeah, maybe you're not thinking about leaving the company, but you should be striving towards creating the space that you want the most. And either the organization will give you that space, or that, you know, enough good networking and exploring that space, you'll find where that next step is. But it might not be in that organization you're at. And that's okay. You know, people outgrow organizations, and organizations outgrow people. So, you know, while, you know, for some people it's very comfortable to stay for a very long time. And I keep hearing, oh, Sarita, you got to talk to me about this, is keep hearing people say, well, the norm is like 3 years now. 3 years is where people stay at companies now. And I'm like, is it? Like, who? I mean, I'm sure people have done data and things like this, but is there something wrong with staying in a company longer? I mean, you know, all these organizations are just planning to hire people for 3 years, knowing that that's what the turnaround time is. You know, me personally, like, I get it. Like, when we hire people at Foundry, you know, I know that they're not going to be there for 500 years or whatever, but I don't have an expiration date I apply to those people, you know? And I feel like if you treat it that way, you can also create a really crappy environment for folks.
I think so. And I think you very deliberately make opportunities for people too, right? Like, you don't, like, people, if you're really targeting people who are like drivers and ambitious, maybe not ambitious in terms of title, or maybe they are, but like definitely ambitious in terms of like just sort of like this insatiable need to like grow and learn, which is like, I think these are the kind of people that we tend to really gravitate towards. Then there's so many, like my last role, I was at a company for 7 years, and I was in like 4 different functions. I took, you know, there's this idea of like a lateral, like a lattice sort of, like, instead of a career ladder, it's a lattice. And so you take, you know, sometimes you go diagonally down, or, you know, across or whatever. But I had so much opportunity to, like, I went in very pigeonholed as a technology person, and I felt like I left and I felt like I could run a business. And I think like part of that was people gave me opportunity. A large part of it was that I was like relentlessly seeking opportunity. But I think to your point about like inside and outside, like, you know, cultivating like opportunities where you are now and then building that network outside, hands down, that there is no bigger thing for your career than like your outside network. Like, I think it's incredibly important, especially if you're in a big organization, to make sure you know people inside that organization and you have opportunities there. But to your point, like, you just never know, like, how is an industry going to go? Like, is a company pivoting? There's so many things that happen. And so you just like, I think, you know, it's a little bit of a balance, and maybe it's art and science, but like, you have to do a great job where you are, and you want to learn there, and you want to maximize what you can do there. But also, like, if you, like, to your point, I also know many people who were like at, say, Target or like a giant place, and they're like, my whole world is here.
Yes.
And then it's really, really tough for them. And then they're in a position where they're like, it's sort of like this kind of asynchronous thing when they're networking, because they're actively looking for work. And so it's like, if you're in a position where like you can maybe sort of get ahead of that, and just actually, like, you know, I would think of you're a professional friend. It's not just that you're a network person. Like, I think about like my favorite people in my network are my friends now.
Yes.
And
100%.
And I just like reach out to them, not because it's quid pro quo, but just because like that's the nature of friendship. Like, you just enjoy spending time with them. And then, and I would say almost every role that I've had since I graduated from college has been from friends in my network, like people who know me and trust me. And I know it, like, I think there are times in life when it's really, really hard to cultivate that outside network. Like, if you have little kids and things like that, I think it's quite difficult, but it is easier now. It's easier now than maybe it was, say, 10 years ago.
Yeah. Well, the virtual stuff helps make it. And that's what I'm excited about, what comes out of. I think that's one of the other opportunities the pandemic has created, was this not so much of a stigma around virtual events, virtual networking, and those types of things. I think, again, yeah, there is some actual, intrinsic value to being physically in a place with people that you can't just replace. But it doesn't mean you can't still get value via a virtual environment. And I think it's broken down a lot of the social norms and things that we would expect, right? I mean, I talk about it all the time, right? One reason why we're doing a YouTube show right now and not a podcast is that I've always wanted to do video as part of my thing, but people would be like, well, I'm not really ready to be on video. I don't want to be on video. Now nobody cares, Sarita. Everybody's on video. So it's like, hey, this is perfect timing. I'm going to take it up. I'm going to take advantage of this situation and throw everybody on video. Now, of course, the show gets made into a podcast later. But the thing for me has been trying to focus on the positive things that have come out of this, right? Which is, sure, if we get to go back, let's say 100% back to the office, and but now what can we take from the things we learned doing virtual things? Well, how can we expand that and make it a part of, instead of just replacing, right? Like a value add to the office culture that we currently have. And those are the things that excite me, but again, I think the problem is that, and I would love your opinion on this, is that a lot of people wait for the company or leadership to make these determinations and then participate in those things. They're waiting for somebody else to create the space for them, and then they'll come along with that. And that's where I've seen, again, it's really a struggle, because I know a lot of people that I talk to, business owners, they want their employees and their people telling them, this is what we need, this is what we want to do this. But a lot of times, I'm scared of getting fired. It's a freaking pandemic out here. So, I don't want to rock the boat, Sarita.
Oh, you're right. I think you can't say enough about the safety piece. Like when you think about why do people tolerate what they tolerate, inevitably there's some, like if it's not a conscious calculation of trade-offs, there's some unconscious calculation of it. But yeah, I think that's why I think I love the idea of like everyday disruption, like kind of incremental change, because, people don't change, cultures don't change overnight. Like, it's just like, the idea is like, you just move the bar just a tiny bit and everyone acclimates, and then you move the bar a tiny bit and everyone acclimates. And I think there's some work in like just figuring out, like, you don't want anyone to call you a rabble rouser or a tree hugger. Like, I'm okay being called a tree hugger, but maybe not everybody's like, maybe you're not in an organization where that's okay. But you can do like, I think you can just like sort of, I guess there's so many rules of thumb, but one of the big ones is like, don't do it alone. Like, find your allies, find your people. I'm not a big fan of tribalism, but we're all humans, and we find people who can participate in that. So you don't have to be the hero. Like, maybe some cultures love that, but if you really want to help foster cultural change, you need to do it with other people. I think that's a big one. I think I always think about like, what is my goal? And I'm a journaler, so I write this stuff down. Like, what is it that I want to change? And so if it's something like, I was at a place for a while where I felt like the culture was very, very chest thumpy, bravado, kind of, biggest, boomest voice, and like first, all of that kind of stuff. And I felt like there was no humility. Squeaky wheel, loudest chest thumping, intimidation, all that kind of stuff. And so I was like, I want this to be a kinder, gentler culture. That's just how I roll. I wasn't able to change that culture. That's probably not a surprise, but I think I made some impact on it. But also, I think to your earlier point, you also have to decide. There are points when you're like, this change is just too big for me to take on.
Exactly. Because again, there's it's okay to vent, right? It's okay to be like, oh, these whatever, right? But if you start to find, and that's where I think, to your point about these finding similar people, if you start to see this is a bit more of a systemic thing, is there a way that you and these folks can stop venting about it and create some plans around it, right? Because I think, to your point, then you would feel a bit more like you've got some sort of weight to throw around this thing, because it's not just you and your buddies sitting there at the lunch table complaining about some policy or something. But again, I think what people respond to is solutions instead of problems, right? So coming back and saying, hey, we've looked into this. We've actually talked to some other employees. This is what we think could be a good solution to this policy change that just happened that we don't really agree with. Give them something to think about. You throw these business owners and business leaders, that's all they're dealing with is problems all day. And they're trying to do whatever they can to squash them and stick them under their rug as quickly so they can move on to the next one. But that's why I go back to what I said earlier, is it's kind of it's a two road sort of thing, right? If I can come to my superior officer, as it were, with some solutions, some ideas around how to do this, you know what? And if they shoot them all down and tell me I'm stupid, well, I got my answer. This might not be the place where I'm going to grow and get to where I need to be.
Yeah, I think it's a fundamental point. It's a great point. And I think that's something that I hope everyone has stamped in their minds, is that, like venting that first time is pretty healthy. It's okay.
Yep.
And you need a place for that to go. But then there comes a point where you have to be really conscious about this decision. Like, am I going to keep sort of rehashing what is wrong, or am I going to figure out, like, what can I do to change it? And so I totally agree with you, that idea of moving away from like the sort of venting, because stating the problem is so easy. Like, you and I could spend all weekend the next 10 years talking about the problems of the world.
Yep.
And so, of course, it's much, much harder. How do you solve them? And nobody knows how to solve them, right? Like, if they were easy to solve, they would be solvable.
Right.
So, or they'd be solved. So it's like, it's sort of like that, like curiosity and that willingness to experiment and try little things. And, like even things like if you're trying to change, like so for example, if you're in a culture where it's like, this is very common for women. Like maybe you're in a culture where like a woman in a conference room, a woman might bring up an idea, and then later a man brings it up, and it's like, hey, George had a great idea. And you're like, wait a second.
Fantastic.
What? And so like, those are things where like, it helps to do, like, in fact, I think in the Obama White House, they did this. Like, women would be like, they would actually amplify each other's ideas, and they'd say, Susan made an idea, and then Mike said it, and someone's like, hey, Mike, great idea. And it's like, no. And then Valerie would say, no, actually, Susan brought up that idea. I thought it was a great idea, and let me build on that. Yep. And so just like little things where it doesn't need to be a giant,
right,
6-page essay on why we're doing this thing. It's just like little incremental changes and then experiments. But I think you're right. I think that fundamental point of like, how can you be constructive? Because if you keep thinking about the problem, it's going to eat you. Yeah. And it's just going to be like, it's going to degrade on you.
Yeah,
you're going to feel like you're going to have less agency. Like, who doesn't want agency? Who doesn't want the ability to feel like at least I have some level of control? So, yeah.
Yep. Well, and that's the thing with, we've gone through, we hired outside consultants to help us with a diversity, equity, inclusion exercise. They did a bunch of surveys with our staff. They did interviews with leadership, and, it was a great experience bringing in an outside team that was really digging in and looking at stuff from without any inherent bias, right? From being a part of the organization. And that was such a fantastic experience. And now we're getting into a routine where we're working with them constantly, because we know that, this is just part of the new norm, right? Just like, just like buying computers for people when they start, like, we're going to have part of this diversity, equity, inclusion thing. It's not an initiative anymore. It's just becoming part of our vision, culture, and mission over time. And it's getting ingrained into our culture. It's going in everything from the job descriptions to how we talk about ourselves in rooms to, just like you said, how we're amplifying each other's voices. And it's been such a powerful thing. But, what I found in a lot of organizations is that first person to kind of be the one to step up and say, hey, have we looked at this? Have we thought about this? And I think, I even read one of your articles, and you got some great articles on Medium where people have, and I've experienced this before, where they don't want to be the culture police in an office space, to be like, oh, actually, that's not the appropriate way to say that, and you actually kind of pulled some, you kind of rolled over Susan there in that meeting, and it's scary for people, right? What's your advice to somebody in that situation where they feel like, am I the only one that's paying attention to this here? Right?
Oh, it's super. I agree. I think that specific topic is one of the hardest topics because there's, as you know, I think it's for people in power. It's very common to have, it's just normal to have blind spots. You just don't even know what you don't know. And so, I think we talked about the cabin one, and that's a topic that we covered in our Medium publication. Is for so many people, it's just been part of their own life experience. It's so ingrained in the Minnesota experience that they don't recognize that it can feel very exclusionary. And so there's little things like that. And then there's much more subtle things around particularly around code switching. If you're Black and you're you feel like you can't be your real self, or if you're a woman and you feel like you have to, there's the traditional, you get the 2 millimeters where you're safe. And then it's if you go too far this way, you're too emotional and too nurturing. And if you go this far too far this way, you're too aggressive and you're the B word. And so I say all of those things because those are so subtle. And it's the things that you hear so often in organizations are things like, oh, you're making something where there isn't a thing, or there's no evidence of that, or there isn't data of that, And then you're you step back and you're well, wait a second, just let's look at the metrics. Don't the metrics tell a story? And it's oh, it's the pipeline. There's all these other excuses about, why things are the way they are. And it's uncomfortable and it's subtle. And so being in a position where you're okay, I perceive this discrepancy in equity and maybe how things are handled. And then how do you go, I've had 60-year-old male white bosses before, and making that case when they just simply can't see it, you know? And I think that's really, really hard.
It is really hard.
Yeah.
And that's why I think I think the last year has shown how important it is for, companies and things that set the kind of direction of the economy and things, jumping in and saying, no, this is a big deal. We're doing something about it. I think that's where, you've got to look to, while you would hope it's more of a groundswell because it seems like it sticks more when it's not just a marketing tactic. But that, that it's actual some real changes happening. It starts to make it when Target and Amazon and these other places are talking about it, it seems to make it a little bit easier to talk about it in that conference room, to bring up, hey, XYZ company is doing this around their DEI practice. Have we explored that? Have we done that? So I think that leadership outside of your organization might be something to help there, right? Where you can go and say, hey, this is what other places are doing. Can we explore this? Can we look at this? Again, being part of that solution, right? Instead of just being the police that's saying, well, I don't think that was a good move there. I think doing that research, but again, that's the thing, is that if you look at it and maybe this is something you're excited about, you try and you hit a wall, I'm not saying give up, but at some point you've got to look around you and say, am I in the right space? Has the space been created for me to feel like I can be as successful as I can be here? And that just means I have the right computer and the right tools, right? It means I'm surrounded by the right culture and the right people to help get me to where I need to be. But that's a hard thing to do because you second guess yourself, right? And you're like, oh, maybe it's just me, and you
feel like you have an investment too. I mean, I think that's another part. It's so what you're saying to me reminds me of the Serenity Prayer, which is something that's really ingrained. This idea of can I make change here? And if I can't make change, I have to make this deliberate decision. Are the trade-offs of staying in this environment worth it? Or is the discomfort of leaving, you've made investments, you have, to your earlier point, you've worked hard on your reputation, you've spent time becoming as valuable as you are in your organization. And then if you feel like, okay, for whatever reason, in this situation, in this environment, I've hit a wall. Like I can't make the changes that I want to make. Those are really, I don't ever want to discount them, because it is something that requires courage. It's also something that means that you're just in a life position where you can make those changes, because a lot of people aren't. And, I think in some ways, like it's, I think the word privilege is a little bit of a imbalanced word right now, but there is some element of like, I guess, freedom, or like the ability to change roles and leave a business, and like recognize that, like, the unknown has maybe better opportunities for you, and be able to
right.
that. That's super scary. It's super hard. Not everybody can do it. And
it is, but I've seen so many people in the last year, Sarita, doing exactly what you just said. I think the pandemic created like this, okay, now's the time to jump, sort of atmosphere for folks. And I guess it just affects people differently, but I totally agree with what you're saying. Like the easiest way to stop second guessing yourself is to go and talk with others who have had similar experiences. Is it just me? Are these other people experiencing this? What are some of the decisions they made? And then where are they at? You can, obviously we're all different people, but you can get some good ideas, but again, it's building that network, right? You gotta, you can't just talk to the mirror all day.
Yeah, no, I definitely, you and I probably could do 10 top life philosophies, but one of mine is definitely like, the people you spend your time with are the people who influence how you think. And so if you're around people who are really constructive and are thinking like, what are ways that we can make things better, then that's just going to be naturally how you think, because that's just who you're immersed with. But I think I'm counting on a couple of things. I'm counting on the idea that, like, these conversations that we're having now are just going to become more and more prevalent, more and more mainstream. And so if a business wants to retain its highest quality employees, like its highest value employees, it just needs to step up. It just needs to take this pretty seriously. And I love what you said earlier, that diversity, equity this is not an initiative. This is a fundamental change to how we do business. This is like a fundamental, like, level of standards. Like, we count on each other to be honest. We also have to count on each other to look for our blind spots and say, and like challenge each other. And those, to your earlier point about like, is that top down or bottom up? When it comes from the top, like, how powerful is that? Like, you're role modeling what you want to see. And so I think it's awesome for people at a grassroots level to make change. But, wouldn't it be great if it's like grassroots up and then, top down, and you sort of, meet like, and help each other do better. So, these are things that will take time, but I've never been as optimistic about equity as I am right now, because I really, really believe because people are talking about it, they've seen what good looks like. We all know what bad looks like. And, you're just not going to keep your people if you can't make it work.
Well, and they're understanding also the business value of it. there's real financial value to diversity, equity, inclusion. And that's one of the things when we first engaged this team, was that this wasn't a nice to have. This wasn't just a cultural thing. This is part of our business, like how we're going to stay relevant, and create more creative ideas for the people we work with, because we need a more diverse team to be more competitive in this area. So it's about a fundamental business opportunity, not just, this is, hippie stuff like you talked about.
Right.
Like this is part of our financial planning, and so to your point, there's no initiative or project here. Like, this is a shift. And I think that's scary for a lot of businesses, right? We help a lot of businesses in creating, new software solutions and helping. Those things are, to be honest, they're mostly cultural transformations than they are technical transformations in a lot of ways, because you might have to move some people around now that this new tool is there. People might have to get some training. Some people might not stick around. So you know?
I totally agree. I mean, very few of us are doing rocket science. Like almost always the
Certainly
toughest
not
problems
me.
at work. It's people problems. It's like,
Yeah.
especially right now, technology is relatively, it's pretty solvable in many ways, particularly digital things.
Yep.
So it's almost always at its heart, like finding that, the art and science of people.
100%. Well, Sarita, I want to thank you so much for joining me today. If I want to reach out and learn more about the work you're doing, what's the best way to get in contact to you? Where can I find you? Where are you the most active, Sarita?
Probably LinkedIn is probably the simplest way. Yeah.
Awesome.
So yes, reach out to me. I would love to hear from people.
Cool. Well, Sarita, thank you again so much for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. All right. Have a great afternoon.
You too. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. It was a lot of fun. And just one more quick plug, hiring. I hit that button by mistake earlier. Now I hit it on purpose. But if you like the show and you like things that are here, make sure you hit the subscribe thing and the buttons, and you know what to do. You're on YouTube, and whatever else. You're fine. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.